The stagecoach lurched to a halt, sending dust swirling into the air as Prudence Winters clutched her valise tightly to her chest, her knuckles white with anxiety. The year was 1875, and the Arizona Territory stretched before her like an untamed promise, a new beginning far from the crowded streets of Boston that had been her home for all her 22 years. "End of the line for you, Miss Winters," the driver called down, his voice gruff from years of shouting over thundering hooves and creaking wheels. "Rattlesnake Ridge Ranch should be just beyond that hill, about a quarter-mile that way." He pointed vaguely toward a distant rise in the landscape. Prudence stepped down carefully, her traveling dress already showing the signs of the grueling 3-week journey. She squinted against the relentless sun, seeing nothing but sagebrush and distant mesas where the driver had indicated. "Are you certain this is correct?" she asked, doubt creeping into her voice. "I was told someone would meet me." The driver shrugged, already gathering the reins. "Mail said Rattlesnake Ridge. This here's where the trail leads. Good luck to you, miss." With a sharp whistle, he set the horses in motion, leaving Prudence alone with her belongings on the dusty trail. She gathered her courage along with her skirts and began walking in the direction the driver had pointed. The mid-afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and within minutes, perspiration dampened her collar. The weight of her valise grew with each step, and she silently cursed her vanity for packing so many books. After what seemed an eternity, she crested the hill and felt her heart sink. Below lay a ranch, but it appeared nothing like the prosperous establishment her cousin Caroline had described in her letters. This place was modest at best, a weathered main house with a sagging porch, a barn that had seen better days, and a few corrals containing horses that appeared as dust-covered as Prudence felt. She pressed forward, desperate for water and rest. As she approached the main house, a tall figure emerged from the barn, moving with the easy gait of someone accustomed to hard work and long days in the saddle. He spotted her immediately, changing course to intercept her path. "Hello there," he called, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair streaked with gold from the sun. His face was tanned and weathered, but his eyes, a startling shade of blue, were alert and questioning. "Can I help you, madam?" Prudence stopped, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must appear. "I'm looking for Rattlesnake Ridge Ranch," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My cousin Caroline Winters married Edward Thompson, who owns the ranch. I've come to help with their children." The man's expression shifted, first to confusion, then to something that might have been sympathy. "Madam, I think there's been some mistake. This is Broken Spoke Ranch. Rattlesnake Ridge is about 40 miles east of here, and I'm afraid I don't know any Thompsons." Prudence felt the blood drain from her face. 40 miles? But that's impossible, the stagecoach driver said. "Stagecoach drivers aren't always familiar with these parts," the man said gently. "Was someone supposed to meet you?" "Yes," Prudence whispered, her throat suddenly dry. "My cousin wrote that her husband would collect me from the stage." The man surveyed the empty landscape and shook his head. "Next stage doesn't come through for 3 days, and it'll be dark in a few hours." He seemed to make a decision, squaring his shoulders. "My name's Matthew Jenkins. This is my ranch, and right or wrong, you're welcome here. At least until we can figure out how to get you where you need to go." Prudence blinked back tears of frustration. "That's very kind, Mr. Jenkins, but I couldn't possibly impose." "It's not an imposition," Matthew interrupted. "It would be unchristian to leave a lady stranded. My housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, will see to your comfort. Tomorrow we can try to send word to your family." Before Prudence could protest further, he reached for her valise. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and she was struck by the contrast between his calloused hand and her own smooth one. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Prudence felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," she said quietly. Call me Matthew, he replied with a slight smile. Formalities don't count for much out here. He led her toward the house, calling out as they approached. Mrs. Holloway, we have a visitor. An older woman with silver-streaked dark hair appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her shrewd eyes took in Prudence's travel-worn appearance in one sweeping glance. Mercy me, child, you look ready to drop, she exclaimed. Matthew, bring her things inside. I'll put on some coffee and heat water for a bath. Before Prudence could fully comprehend what was happening, she was ushered into a surprisingly comfortable sitting room and seated in a cushioned chair. Mrs. Holloway disappeared to prepare refreshments while Matthew set her valise down by the door. I'll leave you in Mrs. Holloway's capable hands, he said. I need to finish with the horses, but I'll be back for supper. Make yourself at home, Miss Winters. Prudence, she offered, feeling she owed him at least that small familiarity in return. My name is Prudence. He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips before he replaced his hat and headed back outside. Mrs. Holloway returned moments later with a tray bearing coffee, fresh biscuits, and honey. Drink up, dear. You look parched to the bone. Then we'll get you settled in the spare room. As Prudence sipped the strong, hot coffee, she gradually became aware of her surroundings. The house, while modest from the outside, was clean and well kept within. Handmade quilts adorned the backs of chairs, and the furniture, though simple, was sturdy and well crafted. Mr. Jenkins lives here alone? She asked tentatively. Just him and me, Mrs. Holloway confirmed as she bustled about. His father passed 5 years back, left him the ranch. It's not much compared to some, but Matthew works hard. Never complains, that boy. He seems very kind, Prudence offered. Kind, yes, and stubborn as a mule, Mrs. Holloway chuckled. Been trying to get him to find a wife, but he's always got an excuse. Too busy with the ranch, he says. Truth is, he's cautious with his heart. Prudence nodded absently, her thoughts drifting to her predicament. I don't know what I'll do if I can't reach my cousin, she admitted. Mrs. Holloway patted her hand. One day at a time, dear. The good Lord has his reasons for everything, even stagecoach drivers who can't tell east from west. After a simple but filling meal that evening, during which Matthew politely inquired about her journey but otherwise said little, Prudence retired to the small guest room. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Through the thin walls, she could hear Matthew's deep voice conversing with Mrs. Holloway, discussing options for contacting Rattlesnake Ridge Ranch. I'll ride out to Copper Creek tomorrow, he was saying. Telegraph office there can send a message to the station nearest their ranch. 40 miles each way, Mrs. Holloway replied. That's 2 days gone from the ranch, with that new herd needing attention. Can't be helped, Matthew answered. The lady needs to reach her family. Prudence felt a surge of gratitude mixed with guilt. This stranger was willing to upend his work to assist her. She fell asleep contemplating the curious twist of fate that had deposited her at Broken Spoke Ranch. Morning brought clarity and purpose. Prudence rose early, donned her simplest dress, and ventured to the kitchen where Mrs. Holloway was already preparing breakfast. Good morning, dear. Sleep well. The older woman cracked eggs into a cast-iron skillet. Yes, thank you. Prudence approached tentatively. May I help with anything? Mrs. Holloway raised an eyebrow but nodded toward a bowl of dough. You can shape those into biscuits if you're of a mind to. Prudence rolled up her sleeves and set to work, grateful for something to occupy her hands. She had just placed the biscuits in the oven when Matthew entered, looking fresh despite the early hour. Morning, ladies, he greeted them, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Miss Winters, I hope you rested well. I did, thank you, she replied, suddenly conscious of her informal appearance. "Mr. Jenkins, Matthew, I understand you plan to ride to a telegraph office today on my behalf." He nodded, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Holloway. "It's the quickest way to reach your family." Prudence straightened her shoulders. "I appreciate your kindness, but I can't allow you to neglect your responsibilities here. Mrs. Holloway mentioned you have work that can't wait." Matthew's expression remained neutral, but his eyes studied her with new interest. "What do you propose?" "I'll stay and help around the ranch until the next stagecoach arrives," she said decisively. "You can send your ranch hand with a message when he next goes to town." "Ranch hand?" Matthew's lips quirked upward. "Miss Winters, my staff consists of Mrs. Holloway and myself, plus Billy, who comes by 3 days a week to help with the horses. This isn't the grand operation you might be accustomed to." Prudence felt her cheeks warm. "I didn't mean to presume. It's just I don't wish to be a burden." "You're no burden," Matthew assured her. "But I accept your offer to stay until the stage returns. As for helping around the ranch—" He glanced at her delicate hands and fine, if somewhat rumpled, dress. Prudence raised her chin. "I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Jenkins. I may have grown up in Boston, but I'm not helpless." Mrs. Holloway chuckled. "Let her help me with the washing, Matthew. The girl needs something to do besides fret." Matthew nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'll write a message to your cousin, and Billy can take it to Copper Creek when he comes tomorrow." Breakfast passed pleasantly, with Mrs. Holloway regaling Prudence with stories about the area's history. Afterward, Prudence changed into her sturdiest dress and joined the housekeeper for a day of domestic tasks that proved far more demanding than she had anticipated. By mid-afternoon, her arms ached from wringing out wet laundry, and she had developed a newfound respect for the older woman's stamina. They were hanging the last sheets on the line when Matthew rode in, leading a small herd of cattle into a nearby corral. Prudence couldn't help but watch as he dismounted with fluid grace. His shirt clung to his broad shoulders, dampened by sweat, and his movements displayed the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor. He glanced their way and raised a hand in greeting, prompting Prudence to quickly return to her task, embarrassed at being caught staring. "He's a fine-looking man, isn't he?" Mrs. Holloway remarked casually. "I hadn't noticed," Prudence lied, focusing intently on securing a clothespin. The older woman hummed knowingly, too busy with the laundry to notice a strapping young rancher. "I understand completely." Prudence laughed despite herself. "You're terrible, Mrs. Holloway. Just observant, child. Been keeping house for the Jenkins men since Matthew was knee-high to a grasshopper. I know that boy better than he knows himself." Later, as the sun began its descent, Prudence sat on the porch, a moment's respite from the day's labor. The vastness of the landscape stretched before her, so different from Boston's crowded streets that it seemed almost another world entirely. "Penny, for your thoughts." She startled at Matthew's voice, turning to find him leaning against the porch railing, a mug of coffee in hand. "I was just thinking how different everything is here," she admitted. "It's so open." He nodded, his gaze scanning the horizon. "Takes some getting used to. Most Easterners find it either terrifying or liberating." "Perhaps a bit of both," Prudence said softly. "May I ask how you came to be a rancher?" Matthew settled into a chair beside her. "Family business. My father came west after the war, the Mexican War, that is. Won this land in a poker game, if you can believe it. I was born right here in this house. You've never wanted to leave? See other places?" He considered this. "Went to San Francisco once. Too many people, too much noise. This land gets in your blood." "Your father must have been proud to have you carry on his work," Prudence observed. A shadow crossed Matthew's features. He wanted more for the ranch than I've been able to provide. Times have been hard since he passed. I'm sorry to hear that. Matthew shrugged. We get by. What about you? What takes a Boston lady to Rattlesnake Ridge Ranch? Prudence hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. My parents died last winter. Influenza. I had few options remaining in Boston. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, genuine sympathy in his voice. Thank you. My cousin Caroline is my only remaining family. She married and moved west 5 years ago. When she learned of my situation, she invited me to help with her children. That was kind of her. Yes, though I suspect she wants more than just a nursemaid, Prudence admitted. Her last letter mentioned several eligible bachelors in the area. Matthew's eyebrows rose. And you're not interested in finding a husband? I'm not opposed to marriage, Prudence clarified. But I've no desire to be matched like a mare at auction. If I marry, it will be for love, not convenience. A slow smile spread across Matthew's face. A romantic notion. Is it? What would you call marrying for any other reason? Practical, he suggested. And is that what you plan to do? Make a practical marriage? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He studied his coffee for a moment before responding. I haven't given it much thought lately. The ranch keeps me busy. So Mrs. Holloway mentioned, Prudence said with a small smile. Matthew chuckled. She's been trying to marry me off since I turned 20. Says a ranch needs a woman's touch. And what do you say? His blue eyes met hers, suddenly serious. I say a man ought to have something worthwhile to offer before he asks a woman to share his life. The simple honesty of his statement touched Prudence deeply. Before she could respond, Mrs. Holloway called them in for supper, breaking the moment of unexpected connection. The next day brought Billy, a freckle-faced young man of 19 who regarded Prudence with undisguised curiosity. Matthew handed him the message for the telegraph office along with enough money for the transmission. Ask at the general store about Rattlesnake Ridge Ranch, Matthew instructed. Find out the best way to get word to them. Billy nodded eagerly. Yes, sir. I'll head out right away. He tipped his hat to Prudence. Pleasure to meet you, madam. Don't worry. I'll make sure your folks know where to find you. After he departed, Prudence felt oddly deflated. Soon her relatives would come for her, and this brief interlude at Broken Spoke Ranch would end. The thought should have brought relief, yet she found herself watching Matthew as he worked with the horses in the corral, wondering what life might be like in this wild, beautiful place. He has a gentle way with those animals, Mrs. Holloway remarked, appearing beside Prudence at the kitchen window. Same with people. Heart as big as the territory. That boy. You're very fond of him, Prudence observed. Raised him after his mama died, the older woman said matter-of-factly. He was just 7, stubborn even then, but never mean-spirited. His father was a hard man to please, always pushing for more. Matthew tries to live up to that memory. Prudence considered this information, watching as Matthew patiently worked with a young colt that seemed reluctant to be saddled. He mentioned times have been difficult. Mrs. Holloway sighed. Bad drought 2 years back. Lost nearly half the herd. Then last year, prices fell just when we needed to sell. He won't admit it, but we're one bad season away from losing everything his father built. I had no idea, Prudence murmured, her heart constricting at the thought. He'd be mortified if he knew I told you. Proud man, Matthew Jenkins. Now, enough gossip, those potatoes won't peel themselves. The day passed swiftly, with Prudence helping Mrs. Holloway preserve peaches from the small orchard behind the house. The work was sticky and tedious, but there was satisfaction in seeing rows of jars filled with golden fruit ready for the winter ahead. That evening, Matthew invited Prudence to accompany him to check on a mare that was close to foaling. They walked together toward the small stable adjacent to the main barn, the twilight casting long shadows across the yard. "Mrs. Holloway says you're good with the horses," Prudence remarked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "They're honest creatures," Matthew replied. "No pretense, no deception. You always know where you stand with a horse. Unlike people?" He glanced at her, a half-smile playing at his lips. "Some people are straightforward too, just harder to find." They reached the stable, where a beautiful chestnut mare rested on a bed of fresh straw. The horse nickered softly as Matthew approached, running his hand gently along her neck. "This is Penny," he told Prudence. "She's carrying our future, in a manner of speaking. This foal is from good stock, could help turn things around for the ranch if it's strong and healthy." Prudence stood back, watching the tenderness with which this strong man tended to the expectant mare. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the horse. Matthew nodded, extending his hand. "Come slowly. Let her catch your scent first." Prudence moved carefully forward, allowing Matthew to guide her hand to the mare's neck. The horse's hide was warm and smooth beneath her palm, the powerful muscles shifting slightly at her touch. "She's beautiful," Prudence whispered. "Yes," Matthew agreed, though when Prudence glanced up, she found his eyes on her rather than the horse. Their gazes locked for a moment, and Prudence felt her breath catch. "How soon until the foal comes?" she asked, breaking the tension. "Any day now," he replied, his voice a shade deeper than before. "I'll be checking on her through the night." They lingered, discussing the mare's lineage and prospects for the foal. As they walked back to the house, their hands brushed accidentally. Neither acknowledged it, but neither pulled away until they reached the porch steps. "Thank you for showing me Penny," Prudence said, suddenly shy. "My pleasure," Matthew replied. "Good night, Prudence." "Good night, Matthew." She climbed the steps slowly, feeling his gaze on her back. At the door, she turned to find him still watching, his tall figure outlined against the darkening sky. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps of possibilities neither had anticipated. Later, lying in bed, Prudence tried to make sense of her tumultuous emotions. She had known Matthew Jenkins for barely 2 days, yet she felt drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. It was foolish, of course. Soon she would leave for her cousin's ranch, and this brief encounter would become nothing more than an amusing anecdote the time she was delivered to the wrong ranch. Yet as sleep claimed her, it was Matthew's blue eyes and gentle hands she carried into her dreams. Dawn broke with a commotion. Prudence woke to the sound of urgent voices and hurried footsteps. Throwing on her robe, she ventured into the hallway to find Mrs. Holloway bustling toward the kitchen. "What's happening?" Prudence asked, stifling a yawn. "Penny's foaling and there's trouble," the older woman explained. "Matthew's been with her all night. I'm making coffee, he'll need it." Without thinking, Prudence grabbed her dress from the hook. "I'll help." Minutes later, properly dressed if somewhat disheveled, she followed Mrs. Holloway to the stable. The scene inside was tense. Matthew kneeling beside the laboring mare, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his forearms slick with sweat and other fluids Prudence chose not to identify. "The foal's turned wrong," he explained without looking up, clearly assuming it was only Mrs. Holloway who had entered. "I'm trying to reposition it." "What can I do?" Prudence asked, startling him. Matthew's head whipped around, surprise evident in his expression. "Miss Winters, Prudence, you shouldn't be here. This isn't— I grew up around my uncle's stables," she interrupted, moving closer. "I've assisted with difficult births before." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Hold her head. Keep her calm if you can. Talk to her." Prudence knelt at the mare's head, stroking her neck and murmuring soothing words as Matthew worked. The horse was clearly in distress, her sides heaving with exertion. "There," Matthew muttered after what seemed an eternity. "I think. Yes, it's turning." Prudence continued her gentle ministrations, aware of Matthew's intense concentration and the sweat beading on his brow. Mrs. Holloway stood nearby, ready with clean cloths and water. Suddenly, the mare gave a mighty push, and Matthew exclaimed in satisfaction, "Here it comes." Prudence watched in wonder as a wet, gangly foal slid into the world, its coat slick and dark. Matthew worked quickly, clearing the newborn's nose and mouth, then moved back to allow the mother to greet her offspring. "A colt," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "And a fine one at that." The exhausted mare nuzzled her foal, and the tiny horse struggled valiantly to stand on wobbly legs. Prudence couldn't tear her eyes away from the miracle unfolding before her. "You did well," Matthew said quietly, and Prudence realized he was speaking to her. Most city ladies would have fainted at the sight. "I'm not most city ladies," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips despite her weariness. "No," he agreed, his eyes warm with something that might have been admiration. "You certainly are not." They remained in the stable until the colt successfully nursed for the first time, a triumph that brought smiles to all three humans watching. As they finally headed back to the house for a late breakfast, Matthew fell into step beside Prudence. "Thank you," he said simply. "Your help made a difference." "I'm glad I could assist," she replied. "He truly is a beautiful foal. He needs a name." Prudence considered this. "What about Phoenix, rising from the struggles of the night?" Matthew smiled a full, unguarded smile that transformed his weathered face and made Prudence's heart skip a beat. "Phoenix. I like it." The day passed in a pleasant haze of routine tasks and stolen glances. Prudence found herself noticing small details about Matthew, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the careful precision with which he performed even the most mundane chores, the gentle authority in his voice when giving instructions to Billy, who had returned from Copper Creek late in the afternoon. "Message sent," Billy reported, handing Matthew a receipt from the telegraph office. "The storekeeper says he knows of Rattlesnake Ridge. It's a big spread, owned by a fella named Thompson sure enough. Says they come to town every few weeks for supplies." "Did you leave word at the store as well?" Matthew asked. Billy nodded. "Left a note saying Miss Winters is safe at Broken Spoke. Figured belt and suspenders. You know?" "Good thinking," Matthew approved. "Miss Winters' family should know where to find her soon enough." The words should have brought Prudence relief. Instead, she felt an inexplicable pang of regret. She busied herself with dinner preparations, avoiding Matthew's gaze when he entered the kitchen to wash up. "Everything all right?" he asked, sensing her withdrawal. "Of course," she replied too quickly. "I'm just thinking about what happens next." Matthew dried his hands slowly on a towel. "The stage comes through in 2 days. If we don't hear from your cousin before then, you could take it to Copper Creek. There's a better stagecoach service from there that runs closer to Rattlesnake Ridge." "That seems sensible," Prudence agreed, though the prospect brought her no joy. Mrs. Holloway bustled in, breaking the awkward moment. "Supper's nearly ready. Matthew, would you fetch that jar of pickled beets from the cellar? They'll go nicely with the roast." As Matthew departed on his errand, the older woman fixed Prudence with a knowing look. "You've grown fond of him." It wasn't a question, and Prudence saw no point in denial. "It's foolish, I know. We've barely met." "Sometimes the heart knows faster than the head," Mrs. Holloway said softly. "I saw my late husband exactly twice before we married. 52 years together before he passed, and never a day I regretted it." "This is different," Prudence protested. I have an obligation to my cousin, and Matthew has his ranch to consider. True enough, Mrs. Holloway conceded. Just saying, life has a way of taking unexpected turns, like stagecoach drivers who don't know east from west. The evening passed pleasantly enough, though a certain tension lingered in the air. After supper, Matthew excused himself to check on the new mother and foal, leaving Prudence to help Mrs. Holloway with the dishes. Later, unable to sleep, Prudence slipped outside to the porch. The night was clear, the stars so numerous and bright that they seemed close enough to touch. She was so engrossed in the heavenly display that she didn't hear Matthew's approach until he spoke. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" She turned to find him leaning against a post, his face half in shadow. "I've never seen so many stars," she admitted. "In Boston, the city lights and smoke obscure most of them. One of the compensations for living so far from civilization," he said, moving to stand beside her at the railing. "Room to breathe, room to see the sky as God intended." They stood in companionable silence, shoulders nearly touching. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "Phoenix is doing well," Matthew reported eventually. "Strong little fellow. Reminds me of his mother determined." "I'm glad," Prudence said sincerely. "He represents hope for the ranch, doesn't he?" Matthew nodded slowly. "One good colt won't solve all our problems, but it's a start." He paused, seeming to debate his next words. "Prudence, I've enjoyed having you here." The simple statement warmed her more than it should have. "I've enjoyed being here," she replied, "more than I expected to." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I know you have Plan's family waiting for you, but if things were different..." Prudence's heart raced. "If things were different?" Matthew stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "If things were different, I'd ask you to stay." The confession hung between them, fragile and momentous. Prudence found herself unable to look away from his intent gaze. "Matthew, whatever she might have said was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses." Matthew straightened, instantly alert, his hand moving to the gun at his hip that Prudence hadn't even realized he was wearing. "Stay here," he instructed, moving toward the steps. 3 riders emerged from the darkness, pulling up in front of the house. The leader, a broad-shouldered man in a fine coat, dismounted first. "Looking for Broken Spoke Ranch," he called. "Got word my cousin's here." Prudence stepped forward into the light. "Edward? Edward Thompson." The man squinted, then broke into a wide grin. "Prudence, by God, it is you." Caroline will be beside herself with relief. Relief and disappointment warred within Prudence as she descended the steps to greet her cousin's husband. Edward Thompson was a boisterous man in his late 30s, prosperous-looking and confident. "We got your telegram yesterday," he explained, pumping Matthew's hand enthusiastically. "Couldn't believe it when I heard you'd been dropped at the wrong ranch. Damn stage company can't tell their right from their left." "Mr. Jenkins has been very kind," Prudence said, conscious of Matthew's quiet presence beside her. "I'm sure he has," Edward replied. "Good Christian hospitality, that's what the West was built on. Now we've got rooms at the hotel in Copper Creek. We'll stay the night there and head for home tomorrow. Can you be ready to leave in the morning?" The suddenness of it took Prudence aback. "So soon?" "No sense delaying," Edward said cheerfully. "Caroline's fit to burst with another baby coming. She needs your help yesterday." Matthew stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, your men look tired, and it's a dark ride back to Copper Creek. You're welcome to stay the night here. We can put you up in the barn, and Miss Winters is already settled in our guest room." Edward hesitated, clearly weighing the offer. Well, that's mighty neighborly. If it's no trouble. No trouble, Matthew assured him, though his expression was unreadable. As Edward turned to instruct his men, Prudence found herself alone with Matthew for a brief moment. "Thank you," she whispered. "One more night," he replied softly, and she wasn't sure if it was a statement or a wish. Morning arrived all too quickly. Prudence packed her belongings with mechanical efficiency, her mind elsewhere. Mrs. Holloway hovered in the doorway, concern etched on her kind face. "You don't have to go with them, you know," the older woman said quietly. Prudence looked up in surprise. "Of course I do. They're my family. Family's what you make it, girl. I've seen how you look at Matthew, and how he looks at you." "It doesn't matter," Prudence said, folding her spare dress carefully. "I made a commitment to my cousin." "Did you promise in writing? Sign a contract?" "No, but then you still have a choice," Mrs. Holloway insisted. "Matthew won't ask you to stay. He'll think he's being noble, letting you go to your better prospects. But I'm an old woman with nothing to lose, so I'm telling you plain that boy cares for you. More than he's cared for anyone in a long time." Prudence sat heavily on the bed, emotions churning within her. "What would I do here? I know nothing about ranching." "You know more than you did 3 days ago," Mrs. Holloway pointed out. "And you're a quick study. Besides, this place needs more than just another ranch hand. It needs heart." The breakfast that followed was a strained affair. Edward Thompson dominated the conversation with tales of Rattlesnake Ridge's prosperity, the size of his herds, the quality of his breeding stock, the comfort of the house that awaited Prudence. "You'll have your own room, of course," he assured her. "Not as grand as what you're used to in Boston, I expect, but comfortable enough." Caroline's had the children practicing their manners for weeks, anticipating your arrival. Prudence nodded and smiled in all the appropriate places, but her attention kept drifting to Matthew, who said little, focusing on his plate. When breakfast concluded, he excused himself to ready the horses, leaving Prudence alone with Edward and Mrs. Holloway. "Fine young man, you're Mr. Jenkins," Edward remarked after Matthew had gone. "Shame about the ranch, though. Heard they've fallen on hard times. Old Hiram Jenkins would be turning in his grave if he knew how things have declined." "Matthew works harder than anyone I know," Mrs. Holloway said sharply. Edward raised his hands placatingly. "No disrespect intended, madam. Just saying it's a tough business. Takes more than hard work, sometimes takes capital and connections. Things the boy seems to be short on." Prudence felt a surge of indignation on Matthew's behalf. "I think Mr. Jenkins manages admirably with what he has," she said coolly. Edward chuckled. Of course. He's been a good host to you. Naturally you'd defend him. Now, shall we get your things loaded? I'd like to be on the road within the hour." Prudence nodded numbly, allowing Edward to escort her outside, where Matthew was adjusting the saddle on a gentle-looking mare. "For your journey," he explained when he saw her. "Daisy here has the smoothest gait on the ranch. She'll get you to Rattlesnake Ridge in comfort." "I can't take your horse," Prudence protested. "You're not taking her," Matthew clarified. "I'm lending her. Mr. Thompson can return her when he comes to town next." Edward clapped Matthew on the shoulder. "Generous offer, Jenkins. We'll take good care of her." Matthew nodded stiffly, then turned to Prudence. "I'll help you mount when you're ready." The moment of departure arrived too quickly. Prudence's valise was secured to Daisy's saddle, and Edward's men were already mounted. Mrs. Holloway embraced Prudence tightly. "Remember what I said," the older woman whispered. "You have a choice." Matthew approached, his expression carefully neutral. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Winters. I wish you all happiness at Rattlesnake Ridge." "Thank you for everything," Prudence replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, then placed his hands at her waist to help her mount. The brief contact sent warmth spreading through her body despite the morning chill. As she settled into the saddle, their eyes met one final time. In that moment, Prudence knew with absolute certainty that leaving would be the greatest mistake of her life. "I can't," she said suddenly. Edward, already mounted, looked at her in confusion. "Can't what, cousin?" Prudence straightened in the saddle. "I can't go with you, Edward. Please give Caroline my love, but I need to stay here." "Stay here?" Edward echoed incredulously. "At Broken Spoke? Whatever for?" She glanced at Matthew, whose expression had transformed from resignation to cautious hope. "I have my reasons." Edward sputtered in confusion. "This is absurd. You've known these people for 3 days. Sometimes 3 days is enough," Prudence replied calmly, dismounting with Matthew's assistance. "Please tell Caroline I'm sorry, but my path lies elsewhere." Edward's face reddened. "Now see here, Prudence. We've come a long way, and I appreciate that," she interrupted. "Truly. But this is my decision." For a tense moment, it seemed Edward might argue further. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. "You always were a headstrong girl, according to Caroline. Very well, have it your way. But don't come crying to us when you realize what you've given up." "I won't," Prudence assured him. With a tip of his hat, Edward signaled to his men, and the 3 riders departed in a cloud of dust. Prudence watched them go, her heart racing with the enormity of what she had just done. When she turned back, Matthew was staring at her with an expression of wonder and confusion. "Why?" he asked simply. Prudence took a deep breath. "Because in 3 days here, I felt more alive, more myself than in all my years in Boston. Because when I imagined leaving, it felt like losing something precious before I'd even fully discovered it." "The ranch isn't much," Matthew said quietly, "and I can't promise it ever will be." "I'm not staying for the ranch," Prudence replied, stepping closer to him. "I'm staying for the rancher." The smile that spread across Matthew's face was like sunrise breaking over the distant mesas. He closed the distance between them, reaching for her hands. "I don't have a ring," he warned, his blue eyes alight with joy. "And Mrs. Holloway will have my hide for proposing without one." Prudence laughed, tears of happiness threatening to spill. "I don't need a ring. Just promise me one thing." "Anything. Promise me we'll name our firstborn Phoenix." Matthew gathered her into his arms, his laughter joining with hers. "Phoenix if it's a boy. What if it's a girl?" "Daisy," Prudence decided, thinking of the gentle mare that had been prepared to carry her away. "For the journey that brought me home instead of taking me away." Their first kiss, witnessed only by Mrs. Holloway and the vast Arizona sky, tasted of promise and possibility, the beginning of a story neither had expected to write. In the days that followed, Prudence wrote to Caroline, explaining her decision and promising to visit once her new life was established. Matthew crafted a simple ring from a piece of silver that had been his mother's, and they were married by a traveling preacher the following month in a ceremony attended by the few neighbors scattered across the nearby valleys. Life at Broken Spoke Ranch was never easy. The work was constant, the challenges numerous. But with Prudence's practical intelligence complementing Matthew's ranching knowledge, they gradually turned the struggling ranch into a modest success. Phoenix the colt grew into a magnificent stallion whose offspring became known throughout the territory for their strength and stamina, forming the foundation of a breeding program that eventually restored the ranch's fortunes. As promised, their firstborn, a boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, was named Phoenix. He was followed by a sister they called Daisy, and later, twins they named after Prudence's parents. On their 10th anniversary, Matthew took Prudence to the spot where she had first appeared on the trail, dusty and disoriented. "Best mistake a stagecoach driver ever made," he said, pulling her close. "Right or wrong," Prudence replied, echoing his words from that first day. "I was welcome here, always," Matthew assured her, his love as vast and enduring as the Arizona sky above them. "Until the stars fall and the mountains crumble, you will always be welcome here." The wrong ranch had turned out to be exactly the right destination after all.